In this video, you're going to hear some very candid and very honest things. What I've found from telling my story very openly and honestly when I speak with parents is that people come up afterwards and are grateful. And they say, thank you so much for being so honest and transparent and candid because I'm struggling with this or I'm struggling with that. And so in this, I'm going to be sharing about domestic violence I went through, about being molested as an 11-year-old. I'm sharing that not to make those people look bad because I still care about them. Uh, I'm sharing it so that others that have encountered it that are hiding it, and like I was for way too many years, feel the freedom to get on the phone and talk with us. So that's my heart behind sharing everything in this video. And so buckle your seatbelts because, my childhood was a lot better than most people's. And, my dad was highly engaged. He would come home and play with us. He'd even be the one to bathe us when we were young. And so it's odd to think that I had childhood wounds. I didn't believe I did, actually. And what I discovered later in life was that I did, that unconsciously, because the way we handle kids, we kind of teach them to stuff their feelings, and they get really good at it, we've found. And apparently I got much better at it than I thought. And with that, what that meant was I didn't realize that I'd adopted some really strong negative core beliefs, that I had made some unconscious decisions that actually altered the way my personality profile results showed up.
Mm.
And to give you an example, my dad was great, but he was so emotionally connected, more so than my mom, but he was an extrovert and I was an introvert. And I'd compare myself to him and I wanted to be like him. He could walk into a room of people and everybody loved him within 10 minutes. He could sell ice to Eskimos. I walked into a room, I got a fearful and kind of hid in the corner. And then he would try and encourage me and push me to do things to try and get me to, I think, be more like him. And as a result of that, I started to feel like I wasn't good enough, maybe even like I was a failure. And my mom was very neat and organized and would inspect my room every week. And she'd send this message: if you're not neat and organized, you'll never succeed. And they had no idea what these things were doing inside of this introverted, very sensitive kid. And what they were doing was telling me I wasn't good enough, that I was a failure, that I'd never succeed. And so all of a sudden, I made an unconscious decision to succeed no matter what, which is what created my drivenness and why at age 10, I had a lawn business and was making $375 a month back in 1977 as a 10-year-old. I had shirts that said Jeff's Lawn Service on the back because I was trying to fill the hole of these negative core beliefs that this has created. That's minor stuff. Were they bad parents? No. Still had profound impacts upon my life. And so you fast forwards, and my dad starts moving around the country, and I'm an introvert, and he moves up the ladder to be vice president of Pepsi, and all these moves, I'm like kind of even gave up on relationships because by the time I'd start to make one, we'd be moving again. And we moved 3 times in 5 years: Phoenix to Chicago, Chicago back to a different place in Phoenix, back then to Connecticut, and vastly different cultures. And I just gave up on relationships. Unfortunately, in one of those moves, they an older Boy Scout saw this lonely, introverted kid in the troop, and that was brand new, and invited him over to his house. And one thing led to another. And next thing I know, I was molested, something I blame myself for. And picked up on another unconscious decision I made out of childhood when a first grade teacher tried to force this dyslexic kid to learn to read by making me read out loud in front of the entire class. And I couldn't, and I'd stumble and bumble, and I'm led to core beliefs of I'm stupid and I'm a failure. And I made an unconscious decision to hide. So when I was molested, I completely hid it. And I blamed it entirely on me. And I felt ruined and dirty and all of these gross feelings under there that I didn't even feel. And for 20 years, I didn't feel them until I later in life, I had to fill out a form for going into an intensive that I chose to put myself in to heal. And it said, have you ever had a homosexual experience? I'm like, crap, I got to meet that. And I'll come back to that later. So step backwards in time, all of this stuff piled up in me, but I was still functioning well. I graduated magna cum laude from college and um, went on staff with Campus Crusade and um, did performed well in everything I did, but I was lonely. And inside, I was still driven because I wasn't happy with myself. And along comes some changes in life, and I start a company and it takes off. And at one point, I'm worth about 120 or 30 million on paper. And we're just months away from an IPO. We're going to go public on the NASDAQ. And I'm supposed to be worth about 300 million that day and exit $26 million cash. And then all of a sudden, I think God saw that I was enjoying that too much and it was going to my head. And in a flash, three outside things happened in society that took that company out. And it's eventually, I fought God's will for another 18 months, almost got it up again in September 11th. And my investors called no joy in January 6, 2002. And that cemented losing $6.5 million of other people's money. And that hit the core beliefs that I didn't know I had from childhood, like a Mack truck. And I was clinically depressed for about 18 months. And then another crazy event happened, and my son at 7 days old was air evac for emergency surgery after I lost everything and we didn't have insurance. And he's in the hospital for a long time, and the bills are $180,000. And I'm like, I'm just crushed. And that caused me to pick up a phone to the only good counselor I ever ran across, the first one. And it's because she'd been trained in the old days of counseling. And her name was Pat, and she believed in the heart as much, if not more, than the head because she had had cancer. And all the lymph nodes had been removed on the left half of her body. So she looked like the Pillsbury Doughboy or the Michelin Tire Man, and she couldn't bleed off all the fluids because she didn't have enough lymph nodes. She said, "Why are you calling?" I said, "Well, everything I touch turns to mud." And she goes, "That can't be true." And I'm like, "Well, you haven't met me yet." And so I go into the first session and I start talking about this experience I had with a ministry leader who had promised me amazing things. And because of situations that had occurred in life, his promises just pulled on what it turned out to be. I had a very strong codependence, and it just sucked me in. And, within a short period of time, the warnings I got from other people turned out to be true. And he set me up with my boss, and my boss was angry. He was angry. I went to a couple of people that said I shouldn't trust him, and I said, "You were right." And then one of them ratted me out, and I was threatened to be fired. And uh, I shared that with her, and she goes, "Well, I want you to know you're not crazy because I've had two other people in the last 6 months in my office that have similar stories uh, with this exact same leader." I'm like, "That's great." But the second thing is my son was air evac on Christmas Eve and I've lost everything. She's looking at me and going, "I'm sorry, our time's up. You need to go, but are you still trying to walk with God after all of these horrible things?" And I'm like, "Well, you haven't even heard. There's seven more. There's seven more." And she turned gray and she's like, "I'm so sorry, but you have to leave." And she basically had to push me out the door. And I come back over the next 9 weeks. And at the end of the 9 weeks, she says, "You're the hardest nut I've ever had to crack." I'm like, "What do you mean? I've poured everything out, including some of the things that have gone really wrong in my life. And how can you say I'm a hard nut?" And she goes, "That's true. I haven't even had to ask a question. You've just been kind of pouring all this stuff out and you've been through so much. But this is the longest I've ever gone in my 22-year career without giving an assignment." I'm like, "Oh, wow." And she goes, "I think you're finally ready to hear me now." And I'm like, "Okay." And she says, "Your heart is shut down." And I'm a theology student at that point, and there's dichotomism and trichotomism. Neither recognize the existence of the heart. So I'm immediately debating her in the back of my head. And she goes, "I need to teach you before I give you the assignment about something." And she teaches me about grieving. And she says, "If something's big change happens or something really painful happens, if you don't begin to grieve it within about 3 weeks, your body will resolve that pain and that grief and that shock by stuffing it. and sealing it off deep within you, and it'll become toxic to you and the rest of your life. And, with the way when your dad left your mom after a 12-year hidden affair, the way people crammed forgiveness tapes in your face and just wanted you to do that, they didn't let you grieve. And then you got hit with all of these other things so fast, you haven't grieved any of it. And it's TKO'd your heart. Your heart is shut down. And I'm like, I still don't know if I buy this in the back of my head, right? And then she says, so I'm going to give you my assignment. My assignment this week for you is to feel bad. Now you have to understand, in the back of my head, I explode like in anger. $150 an hour. This is 26 years ago. That's $150 an hour, closer to 500 an hour now. And 150 an hour for feel bad in the back of my head. Bleep, bleep, bleep. You've got to be bleeping kidding me. As I kind of storm out of the office and into the 112-degree heat in Phoenix, Arizona. And I don't even feel the heat. And I get in the car, it's over 200 degrees there because it's sitting in the sun. And I don't feel the heat. I am so lit up. And I'm driving down the highway 40 minutes to get back to my house. And I don't make it all the way back to the house. And I break down crying so hard I have to pull over on the side of the road. And I go back the next week and she says, my assignment for you've put yourself back together again at the end of the session. My assignment is for you to feel bad. I'm like, oh, I'm not going to cry. I'm a man, and so that began my healing journey. Sadly, um, just as we were starting, I believe, to dig towards the codependence, she died of a heart attack in the office with a client. Thankfully, not me, because if it had been me, I would have been convinced everything I touched to turn to mud after the 9 major things that had hit my life. And yeah, I don't think I'd be on the planet today, to be honest with you, if she died in the office with me. But that's what sent me out on pursuing my healing journey. And I went to a Christian psychologist, and he let me know I had negative core beliefs. And I'm like, great. So what do I do about those? Oh, just be positive. I'm like, that doesn't work. Gee, that was helpful. And so I started trying to work on that and figure out ways to deal with that. And then I went to another counselor and they gave me another piece and a little coping mechanism. I'm like, well, that's not working. And it was just so frustrating trying to heal, but I was learning along the way. And at the same time, I'd done the research with 3,000 kids and I'd seen kids starting to turn around and parents had begged me to work with them. So I was taking what I was learning and putting it into processes for other people, and they were working for other people, but I couldn't make them work for myself. And a lot of people read a bunch of self-help books and try and get better, and they're frustrated. And I was frustrated, even though I was seeing huge turnarounds in the people I was working with. It wasn't happening in me. And it wasn't happening in me because, hey, just think about it. Take a heart surgeon, put him on the table, have him cut himself open and try and do the surgery on himself. Probably a great way to die really quickly. And that's kind of what I was doing to myself. And so when you stop and think about healing and you think about whether you believe in God or not, we're designed for community and we're designed to seek help from others. But so many of us have been hurt enough, we don't want to take help from anybody. We need to be ardently independent. And I think it's just designed that way for us to need someone to serve as a sounding board, to see the blind spots that we don't see, to push us, to wear the black hat with us along the way. And I definitely needed that. So, did I make improvements? Yes. But was I even close to where I wanted to be? No, I'm probably made 20 to 25% of where I wanted to get to, seeing all these different counselors and psychologists. And then along comes, an event in my life that I don't even like talking about, but I'll share it here because it might help others. Um, you know, my marriage, I dated for 3.5 years. We spent a full year on a college campus together. And in that time, I never saw any frustration or anger. But in week 2 of the marriage, as newlyweds do, we were playing around and I was unzipping her clothing and it caught her skin and she went crazy. I mean, like beet red, shaking, screaming, full on rage. And I'm like, whoa. And I'm like, I don't need to deal with this. And I turned calmly and walked out of the room. Next thing I know, she's running and pushing me up against the wall and getting in front of me, blocking my path. I'm falling on her knees and blithering in tears, you know, don't leave me, don't leave me. I'm like, stand up. You never need to be on your knees with me. And I called her brother and found out what had happened to her growing up, and it wasn't good. And she managed to stuff the anger genie back in the box for a while until we had kids, and then the anger came and started to grow, and I was enabling. And that first counselor I went to told me I was enabling by sitting there and letting her yell at me for 2.5 hours. Told me to leave the house, with the kids because they shouldn't have to listen to it. And I tried it a couple of times, and I'd leave the house with the two little girls, and we'd be walking down the sidewalk in a densely packed neighborhood. And she would follow me out, screaming at me down the public road. And it was so painful and so embarrassing. I caved and just went back to enabling because I didn't believe in divorce. Well, fast forward years and huge issues with the kids and all sorts of ugly stuff, and me having to make really hard decisions to protect the kids. And she eventually crosses over into getting physical with me. And I was hit by a car in anger, was the first physical event, knocked to the ground in a public place. And of course, I didn't call the police. And it just grew and grew and grew to the point where, she, she just, she didn't want to be part of the family anymore. And I didn't even know it because I was so blind. I was like the frog in the kettle. And one day she loses it. I literally run in fear of my life from her. And I believe God confused her that day. And she called the cops, and they came and interviewed everybody. And of course, I was convinced I'm the guy, and she's blithering and frantic and crazy. I'm convinced, I'm going to jail. I'm in, this is not good. And then they interview everybody back and forth, back and forth. And next thing I know, she's in handcuffs in the back of a sheriff's blazer. And I'm in shock. And we pray like mad that night that she'll turn and face the anger and God will soften her heart. She came out more angry, and it led to a divorce and a whole bunch of other crazy stuff, all during COVID. The best thing that happened in that for me, in spite of all the stuff I'd already learned, there was more I needed to learn. And even though I was helping people, and the sheriff's deputy that day called Alternative Horizons. They get two thumbs up from me. They're the victims of domestic violence group here in Colorado, that in the town I live. And that afternoon that she was arrested, I get a call from Megan. Hi, I'm Megan. I'm like, hello, Megan. Who are you? And she's like, I'm your caseworker. I'm like, caseworker for what? She goes, for being a victim of domestic violence. I'm like, I'm not a victim of domestic violence. That's how cooked I was. And I know people find that shocking, and people that haven't been through it don't get it. And they often say things that hurt victims of domestic violence without intending to, because it just doesn't make sense. Why would you stay? But you literally get into a PTSD, or, you know, I don't know, you get into a place where it all becomes normal, and you make it okay in your head, and you don't even recognize what it really is. And so she said, well, you're in shock right now. And I'm like, yeah, but probably, yeah, I am. And then she said, so do you understand what's going to happen from here? And I'm like, I have no clue. I've never been in the legal system at all. And she goes, well, would you like to talk about that on Tuesday? And I'm like, heck, if you know what's going to happen, sure. So she used that as bait to get me to the second call. And I get on that call, we go through that call, we go through 6 calls. And finally, after 6 calls, I'm like, okay, Megan, I think I got it. What you've been trying to tell me is that I'm a significant victim of domestic violence, and it's better for my kids to be in a healthy place half the time than an unhealthy place 100% of the time. And she goes, that's exactly what I've been trying to tell you. And she kicks me over to a trauma therapist. And the trauma therapist quickly identifies I am completely locked in fight or flight. My body probably hasn't truly regulated in 7 to 10 years. I'm in fight or flight when I get up in the morning, when I go to bed at night. That decreases your cognition by 30 to 40%. It really seems like ADD, ADHD, and we're seeing that a ton with kids since COVID. And a lot of kids, even before that, were diagnosed with ADD or ADHD. They were actually having regulation issues. And so, if something moved over here, I was like, or if there's a loud sound, it's like, whoo. And it was all because my system was in constant self-protect mode and everything was in a heightened state of alert. So we worked through somatic therapy that I didn't believe in at first, but it was pretty funny. There were two books on my shelf as I was packing the house because of the divorce, without a wife, while COVID's going on with homeschool. It was nuts. These two books, as I'm pulling off, I never read this one, is Stress and Adrenaline by Dr. Archibald Wright, the head of psychology from Fuller. And I read it and it confirmed everything she was trying to tell me in session. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to start taking these crazy somatic exercises seriously. And, you know, a month or two later, I'm like in the middle of the crazy child family investigations, the DA's investigations, testifying, and all of this mess. I'm walking across the bridge in our town over a river, and I like stop and I'm like, wow, this is really beautiful. And look at the sky. It's pretty too. It's like a shift had occurred. Color came back to life because I was regulated. And so even in the midst of the crazy, things got better just through these crazy exercises. And then, after that happened, I was in a better place and I checked myself into a 2-week intensive at a licensed counseling facility in Colorado, in Buena Vista, Colorado. And um, uh, that's where I had to fill out and say, yeah, I've had a homosexual experience. That was fun to say. And I'm sitting in the session with the counselor, Pete, and he's like, well, tell me about this homosexual experience. I start describing. He goes, I think you might have been molested. I'm like, no, it was my fault. And well, he was 14, you were 11, were you even getting an erection then? It was, I hate to be that blunt, but that's what he asked. And I'm like, well, I don't think so. And he goes, well, since then, let me ask some questions, see what effects it's had on your life. Like, what do you do in locker rooms? I'm like, what? I just get dressed. Do you ever shower in a locker room? I'm like, no. And that seems normal to you. I'm like, yeah, that seems completely normal to me. Well, what's everybody else doing? Well, they're showering. I'm like, still seem normal to you? And I'm like, oh, maybe not. It's amazing how powerful the unconscious is. And what I've realized in this journey is that only 5% of thoughts and emotions are conscious, 95% are unconscious. So when we're encountering the same thing over and over again, no matter what we do, or our kids are having the same problem over and over again, no matter what we do, and no matter how many consequences we throw at them, making them harder and more resistant to us, it's because they're not aware. Like I wasn't aware. Like there's something going on in the unconscious and they can't fix it until they figure it out. And it's why our process has a very defined and structured way of churning the unconscious until things start to emerge naturally. And and that's what was happening with me in this session. It's like, wow. And then he asked another question. I'm like, whoa. It's like, wow, this event with this kid had a ton of impact on my life without me even knowing it. It was mind blowing. And um, and so, I'm sitting there going, well, I guess I was molested. And maybe all the stuff I've been blaming myself for and all these horrible feelings of being ruined and dirty that were suppressed deep inside of me shouldn't be there. And that impacted lots of things in my life, including my marriage, especially in the area of intimacy. And and so the reality is, we move forwards from that, and it's so funny. He's like, well, do you want to try heart guided prayer? And I'm like, what's that? And he's like, well, if you're willing to try it, we'll just do it. And I'm like, I was in so much pain being so codependent on my wife who was in the middle of the divorce that I was like, sure, I don't care what it is. Let's just do it. Next thing I know, I'm in this visualization place in a safe place. And the next thing he's asking me to do is um, is to have Jesus show up. And I'm, at this point, I'm not sure I believe in Jesus anymore. I've been through so much. And just to put your mind at ease, if you're not a Christian or not a person of faith, don't worry about it. We also do EMDR. Um, we also do what we call guided grieving, which we find to be more effective than EMDR. So you don't have to do this piece, but this is where I ended up going. And the reality was, it was wild because, I'm there enjoying feeling in a safe place for the first time in a long time. I'm enjoying myself and feeling completely safe, which I hadn't felt for a long time in the marriage or in the house. And then he tells me to invite Jesus to show up, and I do. And it was shocking. All of a sudden, Jesus comes walking up along the lake, and he's happy with me, and I'm getting a divorce. And I can sense his love, and it's so powerful, it hurts, and it makes me break down in tears. And the next thing I know, he's hugging me, and I can feel his arms around me. I know this all sounds crazy, and no, there were no mushrooms involved or marijuana or any of that stuff. Um, and and once that happened, and everything was, we were hanging out there just chatting a little, and then he goes, "Well, ask Jesus if you're ready to deal with a wound." And I'm like, "Jesus, am I ready to deal with a wound?" And he literally says, "No, no time like the present." And so I said that to the person that was guiding me, Pete, who's a licensed counselor. Um, and and he says, "Well, okay, I want you to go to the room in which you were molested." I'm like, I'm already in so much pain anyways. Who the heck cares anyways? So what the heck? So I go to that room into this visualization space, and it's crystal clear. I can remember the bunk beds and the floor, and it's like I'm there. And then he says, "Is Jesus there?" And Jesus is there, and I look at Jesus, and then the counselor gives me the fateful words: "I want you to relive the experience." And when it happened, I didn't cry at all, and there was some curiosity involved, but there was also all the dirty feelings involved. And but once I start reliving it, man, I'm crying my guts out, and I use every tissue in the box, and my shirt is literally stained with snot, and it was brutal. And then he said, "Well, I want you to," as it's winding down a little, my tears, he says, "Look at Jesus." And I look, and he's crying just as hard as me. And it's when I then realized the truth that no one had ever taught me, that if God really is with us and takes up residence in our hearts, then he feels everything we feel. And that was obvious from how hard he was crying. And so we just held each other and hugged and cried for another 30 minutes. And then we went back to the safe place. And I talked to him, and he said to me, you know, "This wasn't your fault. And I've removed the wound in your heart, and you're free now." And I walked out of that session with my not stained shirt, with my eyes all bulgy from having cried so hard for probably, I don't know, I want to say it was an hour, hour and a half. I walked past the receptionist who I'd gotten to know, and she said, "Looks like you had a good day." And I'm like, stopped for a second, and I wanted to say, "Heck no." But then I stopped, and I felt the difference inside of me. I literally felt different right here in my heart, center mass. And I'm like, yeah, actually, it was a good day. Seems really odd to say, honestly, but it was a good day. And I walk out, get in the car, and I'm going to go to the bed and breakfast. And, the bed and breakfast where I'm staying. And I'm like, I'm going to go change my shirt, and then I'll go out and get dinner because I got a ton of homework to do from this place that night. And I'm like, oh, the heck with it. I don't care. This would have never happened before because I was so busy hiding and trying to look perfect all the time. I'm like, "Oh, screw it. I'm just going to go in a Subway." And I walk in a Subway with this snot stained shirt, and I walk up to the counter, and the guy says, "What do you want?" And he's looking at me kind of odd. My eyes are all blue, and I just order and go get my food and go through and go home and eat and start doing my homework. I don't even take the shirt off then, because I'm glad I didn't, because I ended up crying doing the homework too. And so some of the guys out there listening to this are going, "I don't want to cry. I'm a man. We don't cry." Uh, a lot of women are there too. And it comes from society, but it's not healthy. Psychology recognizes grieving, and so does the Bible. The Bible has the word grieving in it 67 times. And I can tell you, you can't heal without it. Um, and so, you know, I just want you to think, are you accidentally causing you to stuff your kids' hurt? Suck it up, Buttercup. I had a girl at age 7 I knew who was amazing. And by 13, she was a mess. And when I met with her, because her parents called and asked me to help, I asked her when she stopped crying, and it was at 7. And I was there when it happened. She was running across the bridge at Disneyland when we were there with them. And she fell and scraped her knee and she was crying, and all these people were looking. And her dad came over and said, "Suck it up, Buttercup." And she was so embarrassed. And she'd heard it so many times, she had stopped crying. She hadn't cried since she was 7. She was a total mess by 13. And so, when you look at crying as a man or you look at crying as a woman and you feel like it's weakness and it's shameful and it's embarrassing, it's not. Um, and you just have to look around society to see. I mean, some of our favorite Christmas songs are teaching our kids to stuff their emotions. Santa Claus is coming to town. You better not cry. You better not pout. Really? Um, and so I had stuff, so much stuff as a kid that I didn't realize that didn't even seem like wounds to me. And then later, losing the company and the marriage and all of that, it had all been stuffed. And it was eating me alive and robbing me of confidence and exploding my negative core beliefs. And going through that healing process and also 9 months of EMDR. And I'll tell you that guided grieving, having done guided grieving, having done heart guided prayer, and having done EMDR, guided grieving and heart guided prayer are significantly more effective at true internal freedom than EMDR, because that's just desensitization. But it works. I did 9 months of it myself. And so in all of this, we've developed an integrated process that I had to go piecemeal together through 21 years, actually 26 years, to find a place where I can sit here and share all of this unashamed, unabashed, with a smile on my face, with no triggers and no pain. And so you decide, have I found freedom or not? And if I have, well, then maybe you should check us out, talk to us on the phone, and consider diving in and finding freedom yourself. It's been great talking with you. If you have any questions, I look forward to talking with you.